This is Cast of Wonders, the fiction audio magazine for young adults featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Today we present The Most Precious of Treasures by Desmond Warzel. You may remember Desmond from episode 15's Same Day Delivery. The Most Precious of Treasures first appeared in issue number 5 of Shelter of Daylight. Desmond lives in northwestern Pennsylvania and has had stories published in Daily Science Fiction, the anthology Candle in the Attic Window from Innsmouth Free Press, and at Tor.com. Check the show notes for details. And now, we've a tale to tell. The Most Precious of Treasures by Desmond Warzel. When Cardia entered the Talking Carp, Meloran was situated in the far corner at a table which already bore 2 depleted pint mugs and an empty plate. She was the establishment's only occupant except for old Chen himself, who fussed about the open kitchen, slicing various odds and ends of meat and fish for the exotic foreign fare that made up much of his menu. When he looked up from his work, Cardia ordered herself a cup of tea, as well as a third beer for Meloran. A drink in each hand, she made her way across the empty dining room and joined her former colleague. "I read your note," said Cardia. She sat down and slid the mug of beer across the table. "I knocked," replied Meloran. "Nobody came." The entire house is soundproof. What brings you to my doorstep after so long? A social call?" "Nope," Meloran said, and drained half the mug at one go. "I think I found us a big score. Let me show you something." She retrieved a well-worn pack from beneath her chair and fumbled through its contents. "I respectfully decline. I retired, and money no longer suffices as a reward for risk." "Yeah, well, speak for yourself, Car." Cardia sipped her tea. "Do you mean to say that you've spent your entire half of the Dragon Hoard in only 5 years?" "Not at all. I'm relieved. I spent it in 2. At last, Meloran withdrew a paper, heavily creased and brown with age, but otherwise intact, from among the miscellany in her pack. "Time to make another fortune," she said. "And I need your spells. Can't count on anyone else." Cardia took the paper gingerly. "What is this?" "I was hoping you'd tell me." "It's a map." And so it was, an actual treasure map, in fact, like those in children's tales, complete with carefully inked depictions of landmarks, a dashed line indicating the path, even a bold X denoting the ostensible treasure. Cardia couldn't keep from snorting. On the other hand, the writing, annotations, place names and a block of text in the margin presented a set of less whimsical questions. "Clearly," replied Meloran dryly. "What's it say?" "It's in Brillish," said Cardia, "but I believe I can help." She took one of Meloran's empty mugs to Chen and waited while he rinsed it out and poured an inch or so of clean water into it at her request. She returned to the table and sat down again, meticulously drying the outside of the mug on her sleeve and placing it directly on the map. "Brill was an ancient empire," she said. "It fell some 60 centuries ago." "Where was it?" "It was everywhere, Meloran. That's why they called it an empire." She whispered a few syllables and passed a hand over the mug. The water in the bottom grew cloudy for a moment and became clear again. Now the harsh, angular Brillish letters, when viewed through Cardia's improvised lens, resolved into graceful modern script. "That's pretty nifty, Car. What's it say?" "It's in the hand of someone called Carbel, a master wizard. It's dated in the 3rd year of the reign of Lothan, which makes it just under 7,000 years old." "It's that old?" "I can feel a minor enchantment on it. That probably accounts for its longevity. Let's see. Only those of great intellect may enter. Beware the demon, most precious of treasures. And this passage entrusts the map and this most precious of treasures to whomever is hardy enough to reach it, should Cabell perish, which, given the amount of time that's passed, seems likely. It's real, then? Well, it's genuine. Whether the information is legitimate is anyone's guess. And where's this a map of? Cartier winced. Malloran's appalling grammar always sent twinges down her spine. You're in luck. This, she said, pointing at a spot in the centre of the map, is where we're sitting. See the configuration of these mountains, how they stretch down from the north and then divide in two? They look familiar. They should. You rode through them this morning. And the treasure? Asked Malloran. The excitement in her voice was almost juvenile. According to your map, it's down here, hidden in a stronghold about 100 miles due south of this very table we occupy. It's really that simple? Oddly enough, yes. Well, makes sense. No one in her right mind would set foot down there. It's all badlands and marauding humanoids. Certainly. Cartier sipped at her rapidly cooling tea, awaiting the question she knew to be forthcoming. Malloran did not disappoint. So when can you leave? Do you mean, when can I abandon my work unfinished in order to cross a deserted waste so that I can fight a demon with whom I have no argument and win a treasure I don't need? I should have thought the answer was obvious. Well, there's more than one kind of treasure, Carr. What do you mean? This guy was a wizard, Carr, wheedled Malloran. If he's anything like you, he's got books stashed all over the place. Think of it, Carr, books of magic, all in Barillish, all 7,000 years old. A young wizard could really go places with that stuff, couldn't she, Carr? She might even get that university post she was always carrying on about. Cartier rested her elbows on the rough tabletop and massaged her temples. The survival of their one-time partnership, and their own survival in many cases, had depended on an unspoken understanding each had of the other's instincts and motivations. This had made them an ideal and successful team. It was clear that the intervening years had not diminished this connection, at least not on Malloran's part. With a sigh, she finished her tea, then downed the remains of Malloran's beer. 3 days, she said. How's that again, Carr? We leave in 3 days. I have experiments that need concluding. She stood, her chair rasping across the ancient floorboards. Use the time to see that we're appropriately outfitted. Will do. And Carr. Yes? Can I borrow some money? Over the years, the croplands surrounding the burgeoning city had stretched to cover every remotely arable square foot of soil. To the south, they went on for several miles before giving way, almost within a single stride, to a scrubby desert that supported only a few hardy and inedible-looking bushes. A few miles farther, even this gave way to a blasted land of shattered rock, punctuated by rudely thrust-up fingers of granite and seas of igneous glass, dangerously slick when whole and wickedly sharp when fractured. Here and there a stray fragment of worked metal hinted at more proactive threats. Into this inhospitable place rode the wizard and the swordswoman. Their dual protections, armour for foes, cloaks and scarves for wind-borne grit, made them indistinguishable, except that one of the pair wore a sword at her waist. They hadn't talked much since exiting civilised country. Catching up had seemed unnecessary. Malloran's tales of slaying and looting all sounded the same, and Cardier's accounts of her various magical discoveries and innovations would have bored her companion senseless. When Malloran finally did break the day's silence, she practically had to shout to be understood over the clattering of the horses' hooves on the stony ground. Ever been down this way before, Carr? I'm afraid not. Cartier surveyed the jumbled landscape ahead. Near the horizon, some sort of carrion bird circled lazily. As a vacation spot, it falls short. How'd it get this way, do you think? I imagine it's been like this forever. That's some imagination you've got. Well, there are a variety of theories involving ancient cataclysms, and I've also heard speculation that this was a section of another world torn away and brought here for some unknown purpose. No one knows for certain. In any case, an intact Brillish treasure hoard, if it exists, might shed some light on the matter. They said nothing for some long moments, and then Maloran broached another inquiry. I bet it feels good to be out in the world again, right, Car? I've long since had my fill of this life, thanks. I thought that was clear. You're fooling yourself, Car. You were born for this. I find that idea highly objectionable. You really don't miss the thrill of combat? We slew a dragon. Most people have never even seen one. As I recall, you slew the dragon while I was bitten almost cleanly in two. You're still hung up on that? I took care of you, didn't I? Indeed, after the battle in question, Maloran had swiftly borne Cardia to the nearby temple at Philae, where the healers had worked their mystic ways and dragged her back from the brink. At no charge, out of gratitude at the dragon's demise. And if a similar circumstance should arise, try and get female healers this time. Those men had their hands all over both my halves. Well, from what I hear about the Phalaeans, it wouldn't have made much difference, leered Maloran. At any rate, how's it going? Are you back into fighting trim yet? As much as I care to be, why so inquisitive? Oh, because we're being tracked by about a dozen mounted hostiles, so if you're not ready for a scrap, now's the time to say so. Cardia said nothing. The hostilities commenced an hour later with a single arrow that parted the air between them and splintered against one of the ubiquitous granite formations. In unison they turned their mounts and faced their pursuers, 12 figures of uncertain but inhuman pedigree, each astride an emaciated, miserable-looking horse. Maloran unshipped a bow and a small quiver of arrows. With barely a sideways glance, she and Cardia charged their antagonists, and in moments the combat was ended. Cardia's left hand described wild calligraphic shapes in the air, nudging aside the most treacherous of the missiles that now flew at them. From her right hand came great white streaks of flame, each of which struck a marauder and sent it hurtling lifeless to the ground. For Maloran's part, her archery was nearly impeccable, easily penetrating the many gaps in their enemy's scavenged armour. When they'd finally closed the entire distance, only one humanoid still remained upright and alive, and in its panic it was dispatched with a few well-aimed strokes of Maloran's sword. Afterward, they shooed the sickly horses north towards civilization in hopes that some of them might find nourishment or a new master before they succumbed. Maloran neatly stacked the foul bodies as a dual warning. To adventurers that danger abided here, to humanoids that indiscriminate attacks invited mortal consequences. Cardia sorted through the armaments of the fallen. Their poorly maintained blades she tossed aside, but she gathered a healthy supply of arrows to replenish Maloran's store. Just like old times, right, Car? Grunted Maloran as she heaved the final body into place. You haven't lost a step. I'd almost think you've been sneaking out on jobs and not telling anyone, if I didn't know any better, which I do. An agreeable beginning for a final adventure, conceded Cardia, stowing the arrows in Maloran's baggage. You love this. I love my continued existence more. Cardia pulled the ancient paper out of her saddlebag and scanned the horizon for some landmark that could be reconciled with the figures on the map. If you call that existence. Cardia reddened but stopped short of lashing out. Their prior association had been harmonious. Now that they harboured contrary outlooks, she found crosswords rising all too easily to her tongue. Go on, she said, affecting a calm she did not feel. Car, you holed up in that tiny house, visited by nobody, helping nobody, doing research no one cares about, to write monographs no one will read, all the while sitting on more wealth than most of the nobility and never spending a cent. Maloran trailed off, anticipating Cartier's reaction, but none came. I mean, am I right? She finished lamely. Right, as always, Maloran. The last 5 years have obviously been a waste. I should have spent them selling my hard-won skills to anyone with gold, fornicating my way across the continent, and remembering none of it thanks to pouring half a dragon hoard's worth of cheap beer down my gullet. That's a life. Maloran's mouth hung open. Sounds like you've given this some thought, Car. Cartier closed her eyes and sighed. She didn't feel up to finishing this debate and changed the subject. She held up the map. Where did you find this anyway? Maloran ruefully began cleaning her sword. Fell in with some bandits near Silaria, raiding those slave caravans they have up there. That was good work you were doing. Maloran bit her lip. Well, we hit them after they left Silaria, for the money. Ah. One of the bandits, Gavon, well, he and I started sharing stories and meals. And eventually a bedroll. She paused, awaiting Cardier's retort, but none came. Gavon had been hired by a freshly minted baron to clear the squatters out of an abandoned tower within his new borders, and he'd found the map in the topmost chamber. It's a rare swordsman who rifles papers first and strongboxes second. He said he'd always meant to have it translated, but he could never get the funds and the expertise together in the same place. After he caught a slaver's spear in the gut, you took the map and headed for my front door. I trust you completely, and everyone else not at all. I suppose I'd be wasting my breath if I asked whether you'd learned anything from all your experiences. Maloran sheathed her sword. I suppose you would. The pair remounted and continued their trek south, their horses' hooves raising no dust, but only sending up small sprays of gravel. The country they travelled through over the next several days was as varied as it was treacherous. Fortunately, several of its more permanent features, a crescent-shaped ravine for instance, or a grouping of mesas, still resembled their depictions on the map. Others had to be puzzled out. Some of these were simple. The map indicated a river which was long gone, but the faint ghost of the riverbed still persisted. Others required more thought. A mass of sandstone, which had resembled a great cat at the time of the map's making, had been scoured into an unrecognisable form, and they were forced to extrapolate. As they caromed from one landmark to the next, their silence gradually gave way to reminiscence. The old stories, the ones that ended with them standing triumphantly side by side, sprang forth unbidden and filled the gulf between Cartier and Maloran like a foot slides into a well-worn shoe. At night they each took their turns on watch, especially seriously. There was no kindling here for campfires, so extra vigilance was called for. They found themselves in Fortune's good graces for the rest of their southward journey and were not further molested. The reason for this, whether the macabre monument they'd fashioned from their prior assailants, or simply the sheer paucity of life, hostile or otherwise, this deep in the Badlands, was the grist for a friendly debate in which they happened to be engaged when they crested a steep ridge and spied the object of their quest. The other side of the ridge sloped sharply down, and at the bottom was an edifice of large stones constructed in what Cartier knew as the classical style. It was vaguely temple-like, essentially a long box with a flat roof that overhung the front of the building and was supported by 4 columns. The front doors and the surrounding wall were decorated with simple abstract designs carved into the stone. Beyond the edifice, a flat sandy desert stretched to the horizon, almost reassuring in its familiarity after the alien nature of the Badlands. That's a lot of trouble to go for a building nobody'll ever see, Maloran remarked. It's rather eccentric, isn't it? Still, consider the magic involved. It may have been built in a day for all we know. Car, you always told me magic didn't work that way. Well, it doesn't work that way now. 7,000 years ago, who can say? Shall we? Yes, let's. The first chamber was illuminated by wall-mounted torches that sprang magically to life when they entered. Its floor was painted in 64 alternating squares of black and white. They'd encountered this arrangement any number of times in the past, but even Cartier was surprised to see no knights or bishops, no ranks of identical pawns, and most strangely no black pieces at all. Only a single rank of 8 life-sized queens sculpted from some unknown white stone. After some experimenting, and much sweating and straining, Cartier reasoned that the only unique arrangement was one in which each queen was safe from capture by the other 7. As she and Malloran muscled the 8th piece into position, a door shimmered into being in the wall opposite the entrance. That seemed rather perfunctory, remarked Malloran. This was a test of sentience, not intelligence. It was meant to guard against some mindless creature blundering in and wrecking the treasure. I'd think the demon would do for that, if it's still there. It is, or if it's not, something else will have taken up residence in its place. It's practically axiomatic. Well, leave it to a wizard, said Malloran. Can't even pick out floor tile without making a big production out of it. She drew her sword and checked the readiness of the numerous other weapons secreted about her person. Maybe we can take the thing by surprise. The longer we draw out the combat, the worse for us. Cartier pointed at the newly materialised door. I think it knows we're here. Good point. Well, best get on with it then. Malloran seized the brass door handle and pulled. The door swung open easily and a great jet-black fist big as a boulder thrust through the doorway, its demonic nature betrayed immediately by the curlicues of crimson flame that danced across the ebon flesh. It narrowly missed them both. Malloran swung her sword in a broad overhead arc and brought it down on the monstrous wrist. The reverberations practically numbed her hands as the blade rebounded without penetrating the skin. The fist withdrew. Cartier gritted her teeth and slid from a leather thong on her belt a collection of slender ivory wands, each tipped with a different tiny gemstone. Signalling that Malloran should keep behind her, Cartier selected a wand and leapt through the doorway. As in the first room, torches guttered momentarily and came alive, revealing a bare chamber remarkable only for its inhabitant, the gargantuan, flame-ridden demon whose fist had already made their acquaintance. Shaped like a man, but many times larger, it undulated its barbed tail in threatening gestures and unfurled enormous bat wings which were useless to it in its confinement, but made it seem all the more imposing. Its red eyes were cunning and wise, but it was a wisdom gone sour after millennia of imprisonment. And so ends part 1 of The Most Precious of Treasures. Somehow I think the demon will prove to be a tougher nut to crack than the chessboard. But what do you think? Come tell us in the forums at castofwonders.org/forums. We would love to hear from you. Cast of Wonders is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it, but don't change it or sell it. Theme is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov from musicalley.com.